Security measures for the Chinese Communist Party's 100th anniversary are ramping up. Now they're even affecting kitchen cutlery. Shoppers looking to buy new kitchen knives must first register a buyer ID and then have their purchases delivered. Severe floods soak provinces across China, and there's little hope that the surge will subside anytime soon. Cheap Chinese face masks reportedly forcing American companies toward the brink of bankruptcy. Out of the world's most powerful democracies, Italy appeared to keep the closest ties with China, but not anymore. And new action to block Beijing's threat in the South China Sea. The U.S. and Indonesia are teaming up to build a new maritime training center there. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. One of the world's most influential human rights organizations is calling the political situation in Hong Kong an emergency. It's been a year since Beijing imposed the draconian national security law on Hong Kong. Libby Hogan reports.
1 year after a sweeping national security law was introduced in Hong Kong, Amnesty International has called the situation a human rights emergency. In their report released on Wednesday, Amnesty's regional director in Southeast Asia, Joshua Rosenzweig, pointed to a list of court decisions and interviews with activists that show the law has been used to target dissent, justify censorship and arrests.
There does seem to be a political element to this, where there's some of these charges and prosecutions appear to be politically motivated and designed to curb political opposition and silence voices that the government doesn't want.
Beijing imposed the national security law to punish anything it deems as subversion, secession, colluding with foreign forces and terrorism, with up to life in prison. Authorities have said the law would affect an extremely small minority of people and that it had restored stability after months of often violent protests in 2019. According to a Reuters tally, more than 100 people have been arrested and more than 60 charged in the first year under the new law. Amnesty has sounded the alarm and said the actions under the law, including harassment and prosecutions, violate human rights.
We're calling on the United Nations, particularly the Human Rights Council, but also the High Commissioner for Human Rights, to really look into the way in which national security, terrorism, and these other concepts are being used by the Chinese government more broadly to target and limit the enjoyment of human rights.
The Hong Kong government did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to Amnesty's statement on Hong Kong today, calling it purely malicious slander. Press freedom in Hong Kong is vanishing. While authorities are arresting more journalists under the national security law, many media outlets are self-censoring or withdrawing businesses from the city.
First to go was Hong Kong's democracy newspaper Apple Daily. Now the paper's publisher, media group Next Digital, will cease operating from July 1st. The company is owned by media tycoon Jimmy Lai. He's being held for taking part in what authorities have labeled illegal assemblies as part of 2019's pro-democracy protests. His newspaper Apple Daily was forced to shut down last week. That's after its newsroom was raided by 500 police officers, a probe to investigate whether certain articles had breached the city's new security law. The national security law imposed by Beijing punishes acts the Chinese regime deemed subversive or secessionist, or as terrorism or collusion with foreign forces. It carries a sentence of up to life in prison. On Wednesday, Next Digital addressed its Hong Kong staff with an internal memo, informing them about the shutdown. It reads, "Although the road ahead is difficult, continue to move forward." Now the company is seeking a potential buyer for Apple Daily's online edition. At the same time, other media outlets in Hong Kong now seem to be self-censoring or closing down their own operations. Digital pro-democracy outlet Stand News took down commentaries from its platform. Another web-based media, Post 852 on Monday, removed all films it had previously released. While IT website Win and Mac Media announced a full company move out of the city. It's after covering Hong Kong news since 2010.
It's a bad time to need new cutlery in China right now. The only way to buy a new kitchen knife is to have it delivered to your door. But even then, it won't come until after Chinese Communist Party's 100th anniversary. The CCP will be celebrating the occasion on July 1st, having started preparations long before that. Regulations and security measures are tightening in Beijing as the date fast approaches. A reporter from the Epoch Times confirmed those measures, speaking to a shopping assistant who works for the city's most famous kitchen knife brand. They explain that shoppers must register buyer ID numbers at the time of purchase and that customers aren't allowed to take the knives home on their own. What's more, authorities also closed shops and restaurants around Tiananmen Square, the center of the city. One restaurant worker there verified that Beijing officials locked the building's door and even took the key. The forced closure will span 2 days until the CCP's anniversary party ends. A resident who lives near Tiananmen Square, Miss Lee, reports seeing more elderly women wearing red armbands on the streets. These local women serve as community watchers, tasked with keeping an eye on people in the area. Miss Lee recounted that the women used to stand separated from one another, but now gather together in groups of 4 on the street. She notes there are now many more than she had noticed in the past. The strict regulations have also reached the city's public transportation. Starting Wednesday, Beijing subways and buses will change schedule, with some routes entirely suspended. The change affects more than 80 bus routes, most of which will run partial service. That's as major subway routes in Beijing will not stop at stations at and around Tiananmen Square. Nearly 700 miles away, Shanghai seems to be joining the campaign too. Shanghai's Public Security Bureau now forbids all small, low-speed flying objects from operating above where the anniversary light show will take place. They also can't come near so-called red landmarks, or landmarks with significance to the Communist Party's history. The new rules extend to mid-July. Floods are striking 27 provinces and regions in China, leaving only 7 untouched for now. From the northernmost province of Heilongjiang to the southern province of Fujian, floods are tearing down houses and drowning crops on a massive scale. According to Chinese media, nearly 7 million people are affected by the floods. 24 are reported dead or missing. Floods have washed away over 6,000 houses and caused an immediate economic loss of almost $2 billion across the country. And a Chinese state media reported that in Heilongjiang province alone, the floods are affecting over 42,000 people and forcing nearly 20,000 to relocate. Nearly 15,000 acres of crops in the province are flooded, and its neighboring region, Inner Mongolia, lost over 12,000 acres of crops in just one city. 23 rivers in China are currently flooding beyond the warning level. A new round of heavy rain has been drenching Fujian province since Monday, and it's not stopping yet. It's forecast to last until Thursday. In some regions, the rainfall reached about 6 inches in the span of just a day, with about 3 inches maximum hourly rainfall. The downpour is causing floods in the provinces. In some cases, video shows parked cars being pushed along by floodwaters. In the southwest, Jiangxi province also reports trouble. Heavy rains there are soaking areas among the upper and middle reaches of the Xing River. Average rainfall measures over 5 inches in the river's basin, with much of the area waterlogged. Local streets look more like rivers, while some houses appear to be suffering major flood damage. In one clip, a woman explained that this is the 4th time her home has been submerged. Flooding there reached up to her knees, but the water is still rising. Electricity was also cut in much of the area amid the damage. In this building, even the 3rd-floor balcony couldn't escape the downpour. With the outlet to the 1st floor blocked, water on higher floors is trapped. The homeowner explained she called emergency hotlines and even the mayor, but help was nowhere to be found. Moving to southern China's Hunan province, Yiyang City officials issued a red-level warning for heavy rain on Monday. It's the highest danger level possible on the scale. There, rainfall reached 4 inches in just 3 hours. Not long after, flooding, landslides, mudslides, and urban waterlogging began in multiple city districts. Also drenched areas in northeast China. In Heilongjiang province near Heihe City, the local water level has soared more than 8 feet in recent days. And in Chongqing City, authorities similarly announced a level 4 weather warning. That's with many houses and roads already damaged. Coming up, the Chinese regime is facing increasing pressure over the origins of the CCP virus. U.S. Congress members are launching an investigation into the issue. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
House Republicans are launching an investigation into the origins of the CCP virus. They collaborated with experts on Tuesday at their first hearing, working to uncover the truth about the virus and holding the Chinese regime accountable for its cover-up. NTD's Melina Weisskopf was at that hearing.
In the absence of a full investigation into the origins of the CCP virus that could be led by congressional Democrats here on Capitol Hill, a group of Republican lawmakers created a select committee to continue investigations into the origin of the virus and how the CCP has continued to deceive the world about the virus. They're looking into questions like, why did the CCP cover up the early cases back in October and November of 2019? Why did they cover up the human-to-human transmission? How long has the CCP had such a strong influence, strong enough to censor crucial organizations like the World Health Organization and even American government officials?
The idea that our own government, i.e. Dr. Fauci, wasn't being square with us from the get-go, I think is wrong as well. And so we have to deal with all those things. And step one is to make sure the American people get the truth and know exactly what was going on and what people in our government knew right at the start. And people who were in the know, I think, right from the beginning, like Dr. Fauci, they didn't want to come testify.
Representative Mark Green tells us that the CCP has even gone so far as to threaten U.S. lawmakers, threatening to sanction those who speak out against the Chinese regime.
Well, the threat is that they're more concerned about their own reputation. So they're covering up the fact that there was human-to-human transmission. It's almost, the more you push, the more recalcitrant they get. But we have an obligation to push on this one.
And Representative Green says that it's important for people around the world and even Chinese citizens living under the regime to be clear-eyed about the threat that the CCP poses. And Representative Nunes used the opportunity to call out the media for acting as a, quote, mouthpiece for propaganda.
A year ago, the media labeled President Trump and Republicans as racist, xenophobes for suggesting the virus was not zoonotic, but was the result of a lab leak.
There was a lot of back and forth discussion about if the virus did come from the Wuhan lab, if it was intentionally leaked by the government. One scientist said he does think that it was an accident, but even if it was an accident, he says it's no doubt that the CCP used it as a way to accelerate their agenda to become a global superpower. They say that next month they're going to release a new updated research paper from all the new information they've collected about the origins of the virus. But for now, they're going to continue their investigations on this topic because they say it's important to get the truth out there and hold the CCP accountable. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Cheap Chinese face masks are forcing American companies to the brink of bankruptcy. According to Nikkei Asia, Virginia-based manufacturing Premium PPE is suffering a 90% monthly production decline compared with its peak time last year. Their masks are piling up in stock, equipment idling, and staff size shrinking from 280 employees to only about 50. Premium PPE's Chief Revenue Officer Brent Dilley says that for them, selling the mask for less than a penny is not possible. American Mask Manufacturers Association, or AMMA, has data showing that the average price of China-made masks is about 1 penny each. The association also estimates that nearly 300 million masks are sitting in warehouses in the U.S. AMMA member Ambrust's CEO and founder predicts that all 28 AMMA members may close in the coming 2 to 3 months.
When they go out of business, it's not like we turn off the lights and mothball these machines. We send them to the dump.
26 U.S. mask makers wrote to President Biden last month, asking him to adopt policies to protect the country's medical PPE industry. The letter says it's a matter of national security. It states, fight China's unfair trade practices that are destroying what we have striven so hard to build. Data from Congressional Research Service shows that in 2019, almost 72% of masks in the U.S. were from China. Right before the centenary of the Chinese Communist Party, former U.S. House Speaker Newt Gingrich and his wife, Ambassador Callista Gingrich, published a commentary piece exposing the Chinese regime's practice of forced organ harvesting, targeting prisoners of conscience.
The article, titled "The Tragic Truth: Organ Harvesting in China," was published on their website Gingrich 360 on Sunday. The piece says that starting in 2000, China's organ transplant industry began to increase dramatically. It is estimated to be a $1 billion industry today. The Chinese Communist Party tried to attribute their sources of organs to death row prisoners and a voluntary organ donation system. But those claims were full of loopholes. Researchers found that the only remaining plausible explanation for a substantial portion of the organ sourcing since 2000 is prisoners of conscience.
And now we've got credible findings by other entities of organ harvesting happening to Falun Gong members. And these are by outside groups that have reviewed the evidence and said, yes, this is taking place.
The article pointed out that an independent China tribunal issued a judgment in 2018, confirming that Falun Gong practitioners are one of the main sources of organs. Evidence suggests that Uyghurs are subject to organ harvesting, too. It also said that the U.S. Congress introduced bicameral and bipartisan legislation in March to combat this horrific crime. It's called the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act. The bill would authorize the U.S. government to identify, expose, and sanction individuals responsible for human organ trafficking across the world.
It's time that we take a bold stance against the Chinese Communist Party and hold it accountable for these inhumane atrocities.
At the end of the article, Gingrich and his wife called on people to contact their representatives in Congress and urged them to pass the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act.
China's answer to Uber is making a big impression in the U.S. market. Shares of China's ride-hail giant DiDi Global soared nearly 20% Wednesday, its first U.S. trading day, up from its initial New York Stock Exchange debut. It's the biggest U.S. listing by a Chinese company since 2014. DiDi stock opened at $16.65. That's after an initial public offering price of $14 per share. The company is valued at $80 billion. DiDi's New York listing marks the biggest U.S. share sale by a Chinese company since shopping company Alibaba raised $25 billion in 2014. The company is also backed by Alibaba, Uber, and Tencent, a Chinese tech giant. It was founded in 2012 as a taxi hailing app and purchased Uber's China business in 2016. DiDi dominates ride-sharing business in China, operating in 4,000 locations across 16 countries. A regulatory filing shows it boasts more than 490 million annual active users. Italy is taking a step back to re-examine its relationship with China. Italy is the only G7 member that's part of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, and its relationship with Beijing has been concerning the U.S.
On Monday, the Italian foreign minister said that his country's relations with the U.S. are more important than with China. He was at a news conference with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He said, "We are a strong trade partner with China. We have a historic relationship, but it is absolutely not comparable, and it does not interfere with the alliance of values we have with the United States." And earlier this month, after the G7 summit, the Italian Prime Minister said that Italy will scrutinize Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. He criticized Beijing as an authoritarian regime and said it does not respect rules. And not only that, according to Reuters, the Prime Minister also expressed his concerns over Chinese vaccines last Friday. He said the Chinese vaccine has shown itself not to be adequate. You can see that from Chile's experience of tackling the epidemic.
The U.S. and Indonesia are building a new maritime training center in the South China Sea. That's to counter the Chinese regime's increasing threat in the region.
The $3.5 million center is located at the strategic meeting point of the Malacca Strait and the South China Sea. The Malacca Strait is a strategically crucial choke point for global maritime trade, connecting the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. The U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, Sung Kim, said last week that the center would strengthen security in the region. The decision to build the center comes amid rising tensions in the South China Sea. Since April, hundreds of Chinese vessels have been lingering around the Spratly Islands. The Philippines have repeatedly protested against them. And Indonesia also revealed earlier this month that it had been planning to expand its submarine fleet from 4 vessels to 12.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is scolding top party officials for failing to contain the CCP virus outbreak. He says that led to an unspecified great crisis in the country.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has blamed several top ruling party officials for lapses in the country's pandemic response, according to state media reports on Wednesday. State media agency KCNA reported that Kim pointed to several senior officials as the cause of a, quote, great crisis, which he said put the safety of the country and people at risk. The report did not elaborate on the nature of the crisis or how it put people at risk. Several government officials were also replaced during the meeting, but it's unclear whether the shakeup was related to the pandemic. North Korea has not officially confirmed any COVID-19 cases, a claim questioned by South Korean and American officials. The reclusive country has imposed strict antivirus measures, including border closures and domestic travel curbs. Last year, North Korea said it declared a state of emergency and locked down the border city of Kaesong after a person who defected to South Korea returned with what state media said were symptoms of COVID-19. The World Health Organization later said North Korea's COVID test results for the man were inconclusive.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a special episode coming up this Friday. During the Cold War, nuclear arms were at the heart of the U.S.-Soviet Union race.
Just by being there, these weapons deter others from aggression and thereby serve the cause of peace.
Today, the struggle between democracy and communism continues, but the focus has switched from nuclear arms to something much smaller, microchips.
It has dramatically enhanced the Chinese Communist Party's military capabilities, and it is now enough a threat for the United States.
Containing Beijing's rise in the chip industry,
it's like pulling out Beijing's sharpest teeth.
But with U.S. and China deeply intertwined.
It's hard to hurt China without hurting ourselves.
In part 1 of this special report, we dive into the heart of U.S.-China competition and what we can do to stay ahead of the race. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV this Friday at 9 p.m. China in Focus is partnering with the platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.